right. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Dexter. I'm Swarm's CEO. Yay. Welcome to the evening edition of Swarm with Us. The first time we actually did this at this hour. We have a global audience joining us today, and I want to give a shout out to the On Deck Fellows, of which Ian is also one. We also have a bunch of Excalibur folks. Python PH is in the house, and then also we have the folks from DevCon. So it's a lot of interest generated by our two guests tonight, Mr. Ian Logan and Arvin Lat. So let me quickly introduce everyone. I have Aaron, Swarm's very own CTO, who's going to help me with the interrogation of our guests now. It's just storytelling tonight. But many of you have heard of Ian Logan. He's an engineer, an engineering leader, and a champion for founders in the tech space. He's currently the VP of engineering at Rose Rocket, which is a logistics automation workflow company. It's a YC company as well. He's been an angel investor, an LP, and he's led a number of engineering teams, including the early team at Airbnb, one of the engineering leads at Airbnb. Mr. Arvin Lat is a four-time CTO. He's currently the CTO at Newark's Interactive Labs here in the Philippines, and he's an author. He just is coming out with his new book. I think it's coming out this month, Machine Learning with Amazon SageMaker, a cookbook. So I got excited when I saw cookbook, but realized it was something else. So welcome, Ian. Welcome, Arvin. It's super exciting to have you here. You both have such global fan bases. I think when we announced who we were having join with us, like people just signed up really quickly. I think like let's jump right in. And I think like for a lot of the folks who are on the call today, you know, they're members of Swarm. We're a community of builders and founders who collaborate on projects, get them off the ground. But both of you had, even though you're now very prominent in your fields, very well known, and leading very prominent organizations, tech organizations, you know, I'm very interested to hear how you both started and how you made that transition from being an IC to becoming an engineering lead. So maybe Ian, can you kick us off?
Sure, happy to kick off. How far back should I go? This could be a very long description or a short one, Dexter.
Well, let's go back to just before you started Airbnb and maybe talk about kind of like the early days there.
Sure, okay. Well, so I joined Airbnb in 2011. Just before that, if the question is what was I doing, what was I up to? The answer is that I was an individual contributing engineer for many years in the finance industry. So coming up out of college, the reason why I joined the investment banking industry is that my dad, he's in finance and I was hugely inspired by him. So I studied computer science, but I joined the investment banking industry to develop financial applications and trading algorithms. So I actually started off literally on Wall Street. So I live in Toronto right now, but New York is not that far away. So when I finished my computer science studies in Canada, I originally started in New York, which is in Wall Street, but then quickly moved to San Francisco, both because I enjoyed the weather, the climate better, and it was just different enough comparing East Coast to West Coast. But getting back to my engineering career, I was working with commonly different trading desks. So think about like 7 or 8 traders, and there were 1 or 2 developers, which I did this for many years. And so I commonly built Java applications, C++ applications. I was constantly meeting with customers, which in this case were traders, building software for securities lending applications, cash trading applications. And so that's where in my engineering career, I learned a lot about building super high quality software, because at these investment banks, if you make a mistake, you can't really afford to. Either you get fired really quickly, or you can really lose a lot of money. And so I actually enjoyed sort of being on the live wire. So if you learn, as you learn more about my experience, I get energized by being sort of put on the line to, for the software that I build, that it needs to work high quality. It needs to sort of satisfy customer needs. It needs to really be innovative, like using technology to automate the use case at hand. So I did that for many years as a IC, and I reached the point in that part of my career where I felt like I was peaking and learning. I was, at that point, I felt like I had quite a bit of experience building out back-end applications, front-end applications. I had a ton of experience with databases, et cetera. So from a technical perspective, I felt like I was peaking. It seemed very similar in the day-to-day. And so at the time when I was in investment banking, actually a lot of my family and friends were really surprised to hear that I wanted to jump ship and literally do something at the opposite end of the spectrum. So if you think about it, like that was a really good setup for me. I was pretty well established, used to what I was doing. But kind of time and time again over my own career, I like to either do the opposite or really shock my own like system, if you will, to be able to try and do something new. And so that's why I decided to start looking around, and the question commonly comes up, like, how did I get introduced to Airbnb? Because mind you, this was a time where it was not a commonly known name. They did not have a lot of usage and bookings on the platform. They were a very tiny team. And so I actually got the introduction because one of my best friends, Daniel Chu, today you can look him up. He's the CEO of Maker's Place. It's an NFT marketplace, one of the top ones. And so Danny, him and I went to the same school called Waterloo, and in Canada. And when I asked him, I'm like, hey, Danny, like I need to do something different from what I'm doing in financial engineering. He's like, Ian, why don't you join a startup? Let me introduce you to some startups. And so it turns out Danny, he was YC 2009 cohort. He had a previous startup, a failed startup, but it was in the same cohort as Airbnb. And so Danny just introduced me to his cohort companies, and one of them was Airbnb. So when I met Brian Chesky, Nate, and Joe, they were a bit surprised because someone with my engineering background is just not very common. And what I mean by that is a lot of what I'm used to building is software around foreign exchange, transactions, double entry book, like all of this financial stuff. And it turned out that when I met Nate, the CTO, they were, I wouldn't say exactly looking for someone with my profile, but the technical challenges that Airbnb has was, as much as Airbnb is a travel and booking company, they deal with payments globally. They're receiving money in, they're having to send money out to hosts. And so when I joined Airbnb, it was Nate, the CTO. He was the only person building out anything related to payments. And so when I joined, it was just a really good fit for the needs that they had. And so Nate literally handed me ownership. He's like, Ian, he has other things to do. Please help build out and figure out this thing that is payments. And away I went. And so I'm probably sharing more in the story, Dexter. I'm happy to go deeper, but that's part of the start of my early days at Airbnb. And again, happy to elaborate. But at that point, again, the shock in the system was huge because I was not building in C++. I was not building in Java. Airbnb was using Ruby on Rails. It was on Amazon. It was on a lot of things completely new to me. But that's something that I always look for. And so at Airbnb, I actually prepared quite a bit before my first days at the company as a developer, meaning I actually, as much as Rails was new to me, I made it a commitment within a few days to be an expert in Rails. Like I literally studied it like a ton. Its active record model, or just like everything soup to nuts. And then actually, I'll give this one other tip because I know there's a lot of developers on the call. And I guess the point I'm trying to bring across is it's really about a person's initiative. How much initiative do you have? So before I joined Airbnb, I actually asked Nate, the CTO, hey, can you share me the code base? And he was like, why? I'm like, well, before I joined, I just kind of want to take a look at the code base. So before my first day, I actually had access to the code base that I initiated as a request. And what did I do? I literally studied the code base. I was like, okay, what's going on with their schema? I drew out a schema like literally on paper for me to understand their current setup. Again, just like accelerate myself versus waiting to be ramped up by someone or something else. And so that was a little preview into my early days, but I know we have a long conversation and call here, so I can dip into bits as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. Arvs, how did you get started? I mean, like you've built like two of the very early e-commerce kind of brand making tech companies, Beauty Manila and Deal Grocer. Like, how did you kind of get in, and what was it like in the early days?
Yes, good question. From my end, how I got started was while I was still studying, uh, 15 years ago, 15 years ago in college, I started to instead of joining competitions, I decided to work early with part-time jobs because I realized that having high grades and having the loudest stuff may not necessarily directly map to being a good employee. So I decided to try things out and see what I will learn. So I did learn some stuff like HTML, CSS, a bit of jQuery. Um, yeah, so after 2 to 3 years of doing part-time work, also dealing with international clients in my first company, second company, Icon has. After the international competition in Kaspersky, cybersecurity competition, that's probably where the owner of Dilguser Beauty ML found me in probably one of the news articles. So I joined the e-commerce companies because I wanted to have some sort of way to apply my security skills along with the web development and engineering skills to an applied setting. Because I had the choice whether I would go straight to just being purely security, let's say penetration testing or some sort of security analyst work. But I realized that maybe trying things out in a trying a development type of work where security is some sort of value add would make a more sustainable career. I know it's much harder to go straight to the security type of jobs. The mindset is kind of different, and yeah, I decided to proceed with the engineering type of stuff.
Got it.
After I joined the grocer, we were maintaining I think version 2 of Deal Grocer at that time. So while maintaining that, we were building Taste Central. So Taste Central. So I was lucky to have mentors, and at that time I was the type where speed was really important. I mean, speed is still important right now, at the cost of quality. So what my mentors told me was slow down, focus on quality, focus on code architecture, design patterns, and that's where I learned automated testing and everything there in the best practices. My mentors told me to read these books and so on. So yeah, so I was able to become a full stack developer, a real full stack developer. So heavy on JavaScript, heavy on CSS, heavy on backend work, and then probably after a year, I was also dealing with infrastructure work. The trickier parts when dealing with e-commerce sites was the database part. So whenever there's data integrity issues, we have to solve that, not just in a reactive way, but also from a proactive way of things. What I'm saying is that the application and the architecture overall needs to be intact in order to have the data integrity issues resolved and managed. That said, in terms of like transformation, we started with like 2 or 3 developers at that time. So just 2 or 3 developers trying to maintain Deal Grocer, trying to maintain Taste Central, which are both startups. And when you have a startup, the release process is super fast, meaning if you build this today, tomorrow it's going to be deployed right away. And as the team grew, that's where I was able to utilize some of my process skills. So after 1 year or 2 years, I'm not sure if it was promotion, but it was just a role. I never really cared about promotion because skills were more important to me. So I wore the hat of a Scrum Master, and we started with 5 members of the team. So with that, I decided to become a purist while still retaining 20% of the practicality, so that we can embrace the concepts of Scrum. So as the Scrum Master, we had to follow, let's say, this person being the product owner and so on. And from my end, I had to make sure that 70% of my time was still development, because I do not want to be fully a Scrum Master. Because in my head, it's process is important, but from a career perspective, I also wanted to be a CTO at some point.
Okay. So this is a part of your plan always to be a CTO.
Yes. Yeah, 15 years ago. Although at that time, I didn't know what a CTO was supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Yeah. So after I became director of software development and engineering in Deal Grocer, because I got promoted probably towards the 3rd or 4th year in my stay there. I never really had an idea what they were supposed to be doing. And then when a company asked me to be the CTO, which is Complete Business Online, where I got to work with Aaron and other members, that's where I realized and had the time to research what a CTO is supposed to be doing. That's where I realized that the definition of CTO does change depending on the context on where you are working and what the problems the teams are solving. So for example, in CBO, the definition of CTO there is probably 50% technical and then 50% management plus business.
Yeah.
And that's where things get a bit tricky, because at that time, there's still my bias towards being an individual contributor, and it probably took me 1 to 2 years before I finally embrace it.
Got it.
So
That's interesting. I'll pull Aaron into the mix because I was a firsthand witness of his transformation from senior engineer to engineering leader. And that was kind of like seeing a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. No. But for all of you, I think for Ian, Arvs, and Aaron, I think that some of the folks who are in the call today, they're weighing that, that decision. Some of them are like, they're becoming senior engineers. Some of them are asking, their bosses are asking them to take on management responsibilities, recruiting responsibilities, senior software architect. I mean, I don't know if you can put yourself back in that point in time, but what were you weighing? Ian, you mentioned that you were very self-taught, that you kind of got in there, and then you also started to think about how to organize the team. Arvs just talked about his goal always was to become a CTO, but like, when you're at that point and when you had to decide, like Aaron, what were you weighing? That decision, do I continue as an IC or do I become a lead?
Well, for me, like I remember like my first year, just fresh out of college, right? My first job. I had an interview, right? For the first job, for the role actually inside the company. And like the guy was asking me, so like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And like I told him, oh, I want to be a software architect, right? And he was just laughing at me, and I wasn't sure if he was immediately laughing at me at the idea, or just probably because other people just didn't give that straight of an answer, right? But even at that early point, I knew that I wanted to do tech. I wanted to do engineering. I wanted to work with other engineers on a high level, right? But like going back to your question, what was it like for me? I think very similar to Arvs. I never really cared about the positions, right? I never really cared about the titles. I cared about the tech. I cared about the people, and without the people, there's nobody there that's gonna build it, right? For us in Caliber, more specifically, um, it was a time where we were doing a lot of tech, but not a lot of attention was being paid into building the teams, right? Um, I think I really attest to you to this idea that the way that your engineering organization communicates is eventually what your code will look like, right? Um, you can actually understand a lot about the organization just by looking at the code. So like, what Ian did with asking, early permissions just to see the code base. I really like that, just getting an idea of like how this organization works, right? You're going to see like, okay, some people are maintaining this part of the code, right? Some people are maintaining this part of the code. It's going to be how teams are split up. I never particularly, um, you know, thought about being a CTO. And oftentimes I tell Dexter himself that, Dexter, I never really wanted to be CTO.
No, because the way that I bullied Aaron into this is like either you're CTO or I am. So what do you what do you want? No, he was definitely like probably the number one choice, the only one I reached out to.
But yeah, when I started at Caliber, right? I was brought in as the architect, right? It was kind of like my dream job, going back all those years, right? That's why I said that anecdote there. But I noticed that the problem wasn't the tech, right? People were doing the right things. But the problem was it was all scattered, right? And all of those small technical initiatives, they didn't make sense. They didn't form into one cohesive plan, right? And so that's kind of what I told you when I started, right? Within a month or so, I said that Dexter, we need to do these things. We need to organize these people to do these things in this way, right? So that the people, how the company, how the organization is built, makes sense with the tech as well.
Ian, when you joined Airbnb, it was just like right after the famous period where it was founder led. It was just founders running the company. You joined maybe a year or 2 years in. Like, was it easy for you to jump into that kind of really early stage kind of company? Was there a lot of cleanup work? Was there a lot of technical debt you had to pay off, or was it already pretty well organized? I mean, giving perspective, I know what it was like, building a company here, and where the ecosystem's not as mature, but like, give us an inside view of what it's like in an early Valley-based tech company.
Yeah, so I joined Airbnb in 2011, and Airbnb was founded in 2008-9. And for the first 2-3 years, 9-10, it was primarily the founders, and two of the three founders, Brian and Joe, do not produce code. They're designers, and so it was really Nate producing all of the code in the first years. So when I joined in 2011, there were what was it, 5 or 6 other engineers, including Nate, including myself. And when I joined, I wouldn't even say there was technical debt, Dexter. It was more that there was so much to build that's not built, because Airbnb is a marketplace, and with a two-sided marketplace, there's just like so much to have to be doing. So when I joined, honestly, like me and all of the other developers, there was no structure, like team structure. There was no concept of teams. Everyone was, I would say, reporting to the CTO, but even like Nate, the CTO, he was our manager, but not in the traditional sense of like, us constantly getting sort of like, or consistently getting advice and feedback. We were just all there as developers, off to the races. And in fact, the story is 2011 moving forward. It's not until a few years in where me and the other devs, there were 40 of us, all reporting to the CTO.
Oh, nuts.
Still no teams. It was just a bunch of 40 of us, all developing until we started structuring. And I think you mentioned it earlier, like a common playbook in many companies and startups is the people thought about either as first leaders or maybe even ahead, are the best developers. And so I was, or at the company, I was one of the first managers at the company. And I was asked at the time whether I wanted to be one or not. And I would say, I never really had being a leader or CTO or VPNs or anything in my career ambition. Honestly, the thing I was just sort of excited by was, producing as much code as possible, being able to apply my skills to build a product. So I remember actually very vividly at the time at Airbnb, Nate and the founding team were asking if I wanted to be one of the first 3 engineering managers to lead the team. At that time, we split the 40 group into groups of 3. And I remember what I did at the time, and you're probably noticing this trend in me, and what I do is I sort of went on Amazon at that time and read as many books on leadership as possible, because I'm like, what is this about? Like, what is this involved? Am I even going to be good at it? And I figured I'd take the risk and try it out. Typically what happens in these situations is people that try it out, developers, great developers that like transition from IC to management, they try it out and see whether they like it or not. And my best advice to anyone, and the thing that I learned is you got to stick to doing what gives you the most energy. So meaning, like, are you actually excited about it day to day? Does it challenge you? Is it really true to what you sort of want to do versus what you think you want to do? And so when I was one of the first engineering managers, I was leading actually a couple teams, because the ratio of managers to devs, we didn't introduce a large layer at Airbnb. We were just trying to move fast. So I was leading payments. I remember growth engineering. It was site performance and trust and safety. These were the first teams that I led.
That's all the critical ones. It's like any one of those things fall down, it's like the whole company's.
There were a bunch of other critical ones, like on the guest and host side. So what it meant for me was sort of learning new things about how I can deliver impact. And the way that I viewed it was, and why I enjoyed actually the transition, the thing I learned about myself is that I can only produce so much code and impact as an individual. And what I learned in now leading teams is I can do the same, but with and through many people. And what that meant is that I was quickly able to either think through a solution, like write a blueprint out, work with a developer, and they go build it. And I can sort of multi-thread my impact. And I actually got excited by it. I was like, wow, I can actually do quite a bit of things, do it with a great, team of people. But then over the years at Airbnb, what I sort of learned going deeper into leadership is that, a good leader need to keep their head in the system, like the coding system, but you need to keep your head out of it, because the new system is the system of people and teams and processes and like the environment that the developers are working in. And like that in itself is a system, but it's not like a binary system, like, zeros and ones. It's an analog system. It's like real life. It's like, like offline, like online. I guess I see it as being an IC transitioning to dev. It's like you go from online development to like offline, like looking around and seeing who are the people that's producing. Can you be technical enough, but also be supportive enough in the environment that team is building in? And like that I can unpack it like if you want, but like that involves the culture of a team, the technical direction of a team, how autonomous people are, making sure that teams are well composed, meaning they're balanced. So it's really healthy to bring on junior devs mixed with seniors. Just like all of these factors sort of come into play. So these are things that I sort of learned over time. And so at Airbnb, what was especially crazy was, we were scaling. We were like literally like 100xing on metrics everywhere. And so it was just a constant challenge of having to keep up with the growth of the business. One thing that Brian Chesky, the CEO at Airbnb, constantly reminded us, both at the time, and I keep it to me to this day. I mean, clearly it's like burned in my head, is that, as much as a successful company is growing in their metrics, for an individual, for their own sort of contribution and role, you need to keep up with the company. Like these things don't just happen for free. And when I think about leadership, it's never leadership, or a title is never really given, it's earned. And this is something that I learned quite a bit as I moved up the ranks in engineering, was that you really have to perform amazingly at your level, but also above your level. So sort of like punching above your weight class. And typically when I lead other engineers, what they get caught up with is like, hey, can I get the title before I lead, or vice versa? It's like just start exhibiting the skills that you want to be taking. And so going back to that point about Brian Chesky and keeping up with the growth, it's really important. Like typically, like I saw this in Brian, and you see this in like other companies that are scaling, where the CEOs are transforming themselves. And the lesson I learned, and the feedback I would give to devs, is every single person on the team needs to think about transforming themselves. And it doesn't mean transforming from IC to leader, because again, to my earlier point, like what gives you energy? I actually know a lot of early devs at Airbnb that stayed on the IC route. They continue to this day, and they love it. It gives them energy. But they did transform within their roles, within their skill sets. And that's the most important thing, is really keeping up pace. And if I were to give an analogy, like if we were playing basketball, like you gotta hustle. Like you gotta be proactive and like, get ahead of your feet constantly. And that's the thing that I was basically doing along my engineering career.
And to stick to just one aspect of that, from a pragmatic point of view, enabling people to transform themselves and to grow and to learn, what are some of the either systems that you put in place, or practices or frameworks that were helpful in enabling you to understand where people wanted to go and how they needed to grow, and to resource them to actually to be able to accomplish that?
Cool. Well, I don't want to simplify it too much, but I will, because the top thing that comes to my mind is, like, think about the context that we're talking about, which is like a startup, a fledgling business, like a business that's trying to do more with less. They're low resource, but they're trying to build something big. And just by definition, every team member in a startup, they need to be delivering impact. They need to be doing things that are relevant to what the business needs. And to me, what that really means is for a developer, not only building code in a silo. And I mean, it's good for a start, for someone that's coming up and having to understand, okay, here are the projects, here's the requirements, let me build to it. Great. Be excellent at the tools and sort of languages that you're using. But the level up here is really starting to get an understanding of what to do, what's worthwhile to do, of thinking about different options on the table. And I would actually say one thing that that really was the light bulb for me as a developer, moving to someone that was driving higher impact, was not always defaulting to jumping to the first solution that comes to mind. I think this is a big one, because a lot of like devs earlier in their career, they're quick to work. It's awesome, but it's like the first solution that pops to mind, they'll do it. But what I learned was like, don't just do that. Let me think about the why, about what I'm, of what I'm doing, or like what among all of the other features that I could be building, or things about the customer I could be assessing. Let me think about these things and evaluate them sort of on like the ROI, the return on investment. Meaning if I do this now, is it beneficial compared to this other, and sort of create a prioritization stack ranking for myself. So that was a huge light bulb, and I constantly did that. And that becomes especially important when you lead, because you're doing that both on behalf of other people and trying to teach other people to be autonomous and determine what's most impactful at a particular moment in time. Again, because a startup, like every moment in time matters. That's different from saying everything needs to be done perfectly. You just need to iterate very quickly. You need to learn fast and fail fast.
Got it. Interesting. I want to switch gears just a little bit. Arvs, and I'm going to throw this question back to you, Ian, in a bit. But I think that you're working in e-commerce, for businesses that weren't necessarily primarily tech. They're you're in the retail space and the beauty space. So both in terms of making the technology decisions, but then also defining what the technology organization needs to do in your organization was primarily your role, no? And you've built, a lot of the folks who are on the call today are actually early stage founders who are transitioning, who actually aren't necessarily technical founders, but they transition. They needed, to get, their goal is to get product market fit. And once they find it, to be able to build a technical team, a technology team, to be able to execute that and scale that in the long term. How would you advise somebody who's in the process of making that transition? It's kind of like they're in the process of hiring their first technology leader. What would you advise them to look for? And what would you advise them to empower that technology leader to do?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. My usual recipe for that would be, if they were to look for a technical leader, that would be a technical leader employee number one, something like that, right? My recommendation is to look for someone with experience and to look for someone with results. I mean, anyone can say that they have the experience to do it, but experience is also going to change someone's perception on how to solve a certain problem. For example, a certain requirement, even if you had that experience, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that same person would be able to solve your new requirement. Like as they said, experience matters. But at the same time, like what Ian said earlier, that person needs to be able to learn really fast. Because right now, especially now in the technology space, so 10 years ago, if you have a skill called jQuery, it's not really a skill, it's a library. If you have a technical skill using a certain library or framework in the past, one or two of those would already make you hireable. If you know Rails, if you know Django, and you have, let's say, 2 months or 3 months of experience using it, and you were able to deploy a site, I think it should be more or less good enough to make you a junior developer or mid-level developer. Right now, when you talk about technology, right now there's so much, there's so many options that you will be confused. So let's say React or Vue or Angular or jQuery or some other options. Right now, there are too many options. And a good technical leader would be able to let go of those biases, because sometimes there's a tendency for a technical leader to focus too much on the technology, that the technical leader would forget about the business and the other goals. And one of the things that make a good technical leader would definitely be more on the practical side of things, because sometimes when we go too deep into the code, we focus on, oh, is this two-way data binding? Is this one-way data binding? Oh, let's follow this architecture. That's good if that's your focus area. However, when you're an early stage startup, it's all about getting results, getting money, and making sure that your product gets launched right away. Because let's say that you're an early stage startup and you have 3 people there. It's more like a race, because you want to test if your product is going to work, even if it's not perfect, and you have to iterate really quickly. And it becomes less of a technical problem at the start because you have to try your idea out first. Because if nobody, even if your technical solution is, let's say, the best architected solution out there, and it can scale to tens and millions of users, if nobody gets to use it, then it's basically a failure. I mean, it's the hard truth.
Yeah.
You need to know the success criteria. You need to know what the goals are, and most of the time, a lot of people are confused because those rules. Because if when we were back in school, we knew what the goals are. We knew what the goals were. If you do this, 100%. If you don't do this, 50% or something. In real life, we will not be given those answers right away, and sometimes that's where we get stuck already. We have no idea what our goals are. But if you take a step back and try to analyze what's happening, do we still have work tomorrow if the business is closing? So something like that is going to help founders in the early stages. And then maybe if the idea is working, your solution needs to be transformed to something else, something that is scalable. Because scaling is not easy. Sometimes people prepare the initial solution and expect it to scale. So the early frameworks like Rails, Django, etc. The reason why people love it is you can build a quick POC work that can already be pushed to live almost right away. And then when you need to scale, of course, you have to modify some of these things, apply the architecture patterns, and that's where the other skills of technical leaders would shine. So definitely, you need people who would help you achieve all of those things, not just technical, but you need someone who really knows how to feel what the company needs. So again, in summary, start first with someone who's practical, someone who's able to get you what you want. So for example, if you need a Shopify site, then that's your solution. You don't need an overly complex technical solution to get something out there, especially if it's an e-commerce app. And then maybe after 2 months, you see that, okay, the business is working. Is it the right time to change the tech stack and use this instead? Are we going to target the global audience? Are we going to target this local market? So all of those things you have to take into account, because the technical solutions are enablers. They're not the actual end goal. So we just like to share that, and maybe Ian would be able to share other things as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, Arvs, I love everything you said. There's a nugget of knowledge there that I kind of want to just double click on, which is I'll say it differently, because you mentioned in a really great way an early technical leader needs to have a really good feel and understanding pragmatically what to do. I think another way that I would kind of reword that or think about it is for very early technical leaders, because I know there's founders on this call and you're probably looking for like a really good technical leader. It's developers that have a really good discipline to know, like meaning like self-discipline, to know, is now the right time to build this outstanding architecture, or do I need to do just enough to get product out and ship? And the discipline of knowing that, not to introduce technical debt, but knowing that, hey, I'm going to build this now, prioritize shipping, get it out to the customer, get feedback, and know months down the line, maybe even years down the line, I'll deal with this later. This is not great the way I did it, but it's good enough. And if you think about it and you step back, not all developers are like that. Like, and I think about it as discipline. It's like you have to be able to choose when to go in or not, and not, for example, treating a great scalable technical solution as the hammer that you apply to all of the nails. Like, especially in the early days, a disciplined engineer is able to select when to do that. And I think there are scenarios though where you do want to do that. Like say if Arvs and I were, one of the first developers at SpaceX. I mean, I know nothing about space. I've never been in that industry, but I would probably do things a bit differently and make sure that I'm not just slapping together Ruby on Rails code and putting it out for a rocket. Yeah. So I guess my point there is like, it's both discipline and having the focus about what are we building, why is this needed, and let's get laser focused on just like shipping appropriately for the use case and product at hand.
Aaron's feeling very vindicated right now, because I think that this is a live exercise where we're making technology decisions to prioritize, getting it in, like you said. I really like what you said, Ian. Prioritize shipping, prioritize putting it in the hands of the users. And ours, your point is like somebody who cares about the business goal, not just the architecture, right? And being able to use those two as guideposts to evaluate, okay, and to probe whether or not somebody can translate a business problem or a user problem and translate it into just what we need to do to prove that out right now, right? And Aaron, I think like your perspective, even if we're in the process of creating criteria for how do we evaluate, uh, technical people for a verified program, that's like you're the one who crafted your arbitrary criteria, but that's how you defined it. Like the highest in our view, for our purpose, the most significant or the top level scores, can they turn a business problem into technical requirements? Can they translate between business and technology? And then the mid tiers for people who are qualified to work, it's can they turn understand a technical requirement and execute it, right? Maybe Aaron, chime in on that thinking. That's just very fascinating. I think one, I could see how consistent the three of us, or three of you rather, are thinking about this.
I mean, to be honest, when Arvs was telling his side of the story, right? Saying that, sometimes you need to compromise, right? And build things now to get things on the hands of the users, right? I was like, Arvs, you didn't say this in front of my CEO. I mean, I'm worried about Dexter just typing in the back channel. I told you should have finished that feature last week. Na joke lang. I'm kidding. Dexter and I really work together a lot, talking about what's possible and not, right? And what compromises certain decisions will entail, right? When Dexter and I build tech, to be honest with you guys, like sometimes I wake up like in the morning, I'm not sure why I'm CTO. And I ask myself that question, right? Why did I join Swarm? Why did I join Dexter and Alexis? And the primary reason is because I trust Dexter and I trust Alexis, right? Because these people are people I can work with and who I can compromise with. So when Dexter asks for a feature, he knows that my default answer is no. But he also knows that I'm willing to talk about it, right? He also knows that I'm willing to talk through what the compromises will be. So if he wants to add SMS messaging, for example, to our messaging platform or whatever, I'll tell him that okay, we can do that in like 3 days or something, but that will slow down XYZ, right? It will mean that we can't do ABC, right? At the end of the day, technology, for me, from my perspective, is something that evolves, right? We have to remember that software or the systems that we're building, they're meant to solve problems, right? They're meant to solve user problems or business problems. So sometimes we know that it's the wrong thing to do, or it's not going to be as scalable, and sometimes it's a lot of pain to try and refactor that code and make it scalable in the future. But if we don't make this decision now, the company's not going to exist in the next year where you're going to have that time to refactor that code, right? At the end of the day, the software is, the vehicle, right? It's the platform that will get us from point A to point B. So for me, it's not really compromise. For me, it's evolution. It's how I look at it. And the way I work with my team, well, right now it's just me and Christine, right? But the way I work with Christine is I always talk to her about, okay, so we should build it this way, right? We know that it's not necessarily going to scale, but it's going to work for now. So we're very cognizant of the compromises that we're making, right? And sometimes you talk about what the ideal solution is, just so that between the two of us, we know that, okay, we're making this decision, but in the future, we should make it like this. For me, it's an evolution more than, a mindset of let's make this compromise.
That's well, I didn't expect to feel touched in my heart, but Aaron, you managed to do that tonight. I think let's what I want to actually talk about now, and this is probably what's going to be different for building a company in the Valley and building a company not in the Valley. I'd like to talk about scaling a team. Okay. So most companies, when they get their Series A, big chunk of money, or Series B, bigger chunk of money, that's when they start to build out like their engineering teams. And I've seen companies do a number of different things, outsourcing teams, buying up dev shops in other parts of the world, so on and so forth. And I think that, Ian, I think what I see as your challenge in the early days of Airbnb is that you grew so fast so quickly, right? And being able to kind of anticipate and structure that the team such that you don't like kind of implode after that growth, both from a technical point of view and from an organizational point of view. And Arvs, you've built teams like where for example, data science teams, where there is no ecosystems for training data scientists in industry, right? It's very thin, right? So I'm interested to hear like how you dealt with either those pressures or constraints, both from an organizational point of view, like the scaling aspect of the business necessity to scale a team, and how did you manage not to like kind of cave in or implode? Because I've seen also companies get destroyed, their culture, their the politics. And in some instances, their technology itself start to they make compromises along the way. But maybe Ian, if you could kick us off on that.
Sure. Yeah, I love how you mentioned the contrast, because you're right. Like my engineering experience has been in the Valley, and especially with Airbnb being hyper growth, it was a different type of environment where, I mentioned when I joined, we were like less than 10 engineers. We went up to 40, as I mentioned, reporting to one. And then quickly over the years, we went from 40 to 100 to 200 to 500 to basically over the 6-year time period that I was at Airbnb, we peaked at, I think it was 1,100 engineers. Picture that, within 6 years, going from 10 to about 1,000 devs. And so I would say from a structure organizational standpoint, what I quickly learned, and this might sound like a repeat of what Arvs and Aaron is saying, but it's true, which is from a structuring team standpoint, it's really important to map the groups of teams that you focus towards product outcomes. Meaning, and again, the answer is it depends, but I'm a huge believer in whatever product or company you're building, as you form and structure an engineering team, pay close attention to the outcomes that you're trying to achieve in the product. And that's the teams that should form, different from creating teams that map closely to the stack of the system. So like, maybe in the short term, it's okay for a startup to have a front-end team, back-end team, teams that organizationally are mapped to this tech stack. But over time, that definitely needs to change because it needs to map closer towards the product outcomes. So for me, what that meant at Airbnb is, as much as we were moving fast, I had pretty high conviction in me and my teams being focused because we knew the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. So let me get specific and provide examples. So for me, I was leading the payments division. And so within payments, it was end-to-end payments. So meaning we were, owning the top of funnel front end booking flow for web and mobile, through to payment gateways, through to reconciliation, through to like, integrations. And so we would think a lot about the end feature sets and product outcomes. And organizationally, I would structure teams in that way so that there were groups of engineers that were small and nimble enough, but the vision, the metrics, their product focus was ultra clear. And so we would have multiple sort of clusters of these. And from my standpoint as a leader, I actually constantly diagrammed out the life cycle or flow of how these teams relate to each other. Meaning, if I'm defining 5 different teams, I'm not thinking about how they map to the system or stack. I'm thinking about from a customer lifecycle standpoint or from a product and business standpoint, how does one team's input and output feed and depend on other teams? And so also there's a transformation to that over time, because especially at Airbnb, like, I would set up the org in one way that would be good enough and last for 12 months. But I would quickly learn that I would need to restructure and reorganize that because, again, this topic of transformation constantly comes up. It's either transforming what you're doing in the system, or especially as a leader organizationally and in a hyper growth environment, you got to transform the org and the focus. And so that's what I constantly did. I wouldn't say we did full on pivots, but as a leader and organizing the teams, I was definitely like treating it as like my own mini company. And that, in fact, payments engineering at Airbnb had its own like subculture, where the majority of our code was like tested. We were like really focusing on the combination of speed and quality. And again, from an org standpoint, I was constantly transforming and rethinking the inputs and outputs to the teams. And it worked pretty well, because I'll give you one example of a result of this. Was as we were building along payments at Airbnb, I think it was in the 4th year in, we actually incubated a new product within my team. And that's the reason why I led multiple divisions over time, which is one of the core problems in payments was dealing with invoicing. Not the sexiest problem, but that's the thing that we were solving. And in doing that, what we noticed is that a lot of guests on Airbnb were business travelers. And as we went more into the problem, we actually incubated a B2B product, which is Airbnb for business travel. And it was a product that was meant for SMBs, large companies, their travel managers, or people just booking trips on behalf of a company. And we built a product out of that. And then I ended up structuring the team based on those product outcomes. And we achieved quite a bit more sort of parallelization in our resources relative to what the product was transforming and building. And so this was a common theme, like where I would just constantly think about the outcomes we're trying to achieve, or even think about what bets we want to place to try to see what spaghetti sticks on the wall, meaning like what product idea can we come up with that customers will adopt, and if there was some small inkling of that, we staff up the team and go bigger.
Got it. That's really interesting, because my takeaway as a non-technical founder is that by organizing your team, like when you're ready to scale, right? Organizing according to specific user outcomes helps you maintain the focus of the team as you add more people. That's a really interesting insight, no? So that way, whatever strategy you use to recruit or grow, that you create context and ownership when you introduce new members of the team. I mean, is that fair to say? Is that
That's exactly right, Dexter. Actually, my so as you know, like we hired quite a bit, and that was a skill that I had to learn, which was how do I quickly hire developers, but also onboard them so they know what they're doing. And literally at the time that I meet a developer, like an external candidate for the first time, I would immediately talk about what is the user outcome or product outcome that we're hiring for. Like, hey, this is the like booking team different from the finance team, and here are the reasons why we exist. Here are the metrics that we tracked. These are the features that don't yet exist, but we're trying to build. And so immediately when I was looking for engineers, they have a very clear understanding of what they're joining, how it plugs in. Even, for example, that thing I mentioned earlier on me diagramming out the connection between these teams, I would show that to candidates so they're very clear on like, this is how I and the team fit into the bigger picture. And it immediately sets someone up for success, because at that point, that developer, because my goal really at Airbnb and hiring fast was to catch developers really quickly up to speed, because I knew, we had the advantage of being pretty competitive over time because of the brand, and over time people knew about the company. And so what that meant for me was I had a lot of confidence in like the technical skill sets of the team. It was really setting them up for success with, why are you doing this? Why does this exist? How does this fit into the bigger sets of teams? And so exactly, Dexter, it all focused on the users and product.
Oh, that's fascinating. Where did you have like dev talent lined up out the door based on like when you were growing, from 10 to 1,000? Was like the brand or the story driving, or did you have to go out and really kind of get scrappy? And
that's a good question. I have to think about, because I think the answer to that is that it differs based on the time period. Because I'll give you an example. Like when I again, like how I joined Airbnb was I was inbound to them. Like I went to them, remember, because I was introduced by my friend and I went to them. And I think the same was true with other developers. So actually in 2011, 12, the person sitting to the right of me as the other developer, it was Brian Armstrong. Brian Armstrong is the CEO of Coinbase today. So Brian actually was at Airbnb for 1 year up until he decided to leave and build this Bitcoin wallet, this crypto wallet. Crazy idea, right? But my point there, Dexter, so in the early days, at least when I was around, there was some like inbound. I wouldn't say it's because Airbnb was like this known brand. It was just like this fledgling startup. I think because Airbnb is a company in the Valley, naturally, proximity-wise, it's around other startups. Like Pinterest was around the corner, Uber, Stripe ended up forming. So the supply of talent is definitely not low, but the competition is ultra high. And so at least for me, when I ended up scaling, let's call it past 100 developers, where we were literally onboarding and having to hire quite a bit as a hiring manager. The biggest challenge there, I wouldn't say was sourcing candidates because they were all there. It's really assessing and picking who are sort of top percentile for what we're building, the culture that we're trying to build. And so I would spend a lot of time trying to assess that versus having to like look out in market. The market is there, but the challenge is of all of the talent, like again, which is the sort of the top percent. And that actually took quite a bit of time as a hiring manager. And also, I would say the challenging thing at scale is that I didn't want to take too much time of my other engineers on the team involved in the hiring process. Of course, they need to be involved, but there's a funnel that I'm building, and I need to be very mindful of everyone's time because, again, it's this tricky balance of trying to pick what I think of as top percentile, talent, top of funnel, and then taking them through sort of the interview gauntlet without that costing too much time on our teams. So it was a constant battle. And Dexter, I think hopefully that answered your question, but it was different at different points in time with talent. Again, because the Valley is this place where there's a ton of other companies as well.
And I'll throw this question, like it's related to what Louis is asking, which is, if you're a non-technical person, how would you evaluate both Arvs and Ian? I'll ask Arvs first. How would you evaluate whether or not, at this stage, like a developer or a programmer, an engineer is a fit for your team, right? Say if you're a product manager or somebody who's in charge of product, like what are some of the things that you would advise somebody who's non-technical to do to assess whether or not they're the right one?
Yes, thank you for that. That's actually a good question. I'll also build on top of what Ian said earlier. How do we optimize the time part? Because if you were to scale and also to hire for people, how do you find a way to protect people's time also? Because looking for the best candidate, looking for the right candidates to join your team, it's actually one of the harder challenges that all companies need to solve. So for one thing, if you're worried about having a technical background or not, you don't have to worry, because as long as you stay in the field for some time, at some point you'll start to realize that the boundaries being technical or not technical may not be there all along. Maybe it's some sort of bias or some sort of invisible constraint that prevents you from doing more. Um, we're all technical. It just depends on the level. So if you do more coding work, of course, you'll become more technical. But my recommendation there is what I also do is there are two ways to look at it. And what I have been practicing this past 3 to 4 years is how do I find a way to manage a team because I have very limited time. I can go deep to the code and fix the problem for people. However, that's not the best use of time in most cases. One way to do it is to just look for the results. So if you're hiring and you need to scale really fast, the tricky part there is managing the cost and managing the quality. Quality meaning if you bring in this person to your team, would that person contribute to the overall outcome of what your team can do without causing problems, without causing drama, and so on. So what I do there, which you may try or you may not try, is to have some sort of exam. So try to get a 2-day block of a developer, for example, or maybe your future CTO, or maybe a 1 week worth of work, a unit of work. So let's say that you have some sort of interview process. There are a lot of candidates who are super good when it comes to verbal interviews. That they seem really good when you're interviewing them, but when they need to produce an output, they'll have all of these excuses. At the end of the day, if you're given something, just do it. And we need to look for people who are focused on getting the results. So how do we do it? One trick I do is I simply make them build a simple website, a proof of concept code, and I have the time to produce the same output because a person's genuine set of actions and behavior would come out when they are under pressure. So there are multiple states of a human being. So if you're in a relaxed state, of course you can say this. So when I'm doing interviews in the past, also right now also although I did more interview stuff in my previous company because we had to add more people at some point in time. During the interview, I'll ask them, can you share your experience using Python? What can you do with this? And they are super proud of their accomplishments. And they seem to be able to do everything. And then I give them the exam. And 75% of people who just read the one piece of paper, build me a website using this tech stack, they walk out. Oh. Because they never were experienced to do that kind of thing. And some of the people who push through, we get to observe their behavior and the way they would behave in the company when under pressure would definitely reflect during the interview process, because that's the hard part to identify. How would they behave when they're under pressure? Because the moment you join the company, you will be given goals, you'll be given assignments, and most of the time, you'll be under pressure. So it's a good way to test things. And if you're saying that you're not confident enough to tell everyone that you don't have a technical background, you don't have to become a developer to know what their goals are, to know what the developer's goals are. The developer's goals would be to build a website, to build you something that users can see. So if they cannot even add a button there, then maybe you need to look for someone else. And it's not really a disadvantage to have no technical background because you can learn these things. There's something called technical acuity. Because sometimes people think, do I need to be a specialist? Do I need to be a generalist? When you're looking for candidates, you need to look for someone with high technical acuity, meaning that a person's or an individual's previous experiences can be used and modified a bit to be able to solve newer problems. So that's something that's rarer to find, but once you find someone like that, let's say Aaron, very lucky to be able to work with Aaron for some time. So initially we were building a lot of websites, smaller websites, and then he was assigned to this machine learning powered application, and we use a super cool tech stack using Kubernetes, etc. And one of the things that amazed me is that despite having this high pressured setup where there's a strict timeline, Aaron was able to learn this new tech stack really fast and be able to produce output there. And yeah, it's all about getting the output, because right now we are so confused on what we need to focus on. At the end of the day, keep things simple. Can this person give you output or not? And yeah, if you guys have other notes on that, feel free to add on top of what I shared.
Just a quick prelude, I think interlude. If you have questions, please pop them into the chat right now. We'll get to a few more of them. We do have some time. I didn't realize, I forgot, Aaron, that you had worked with like two of us before. Ian, please don't take that as a cue to recruit him. But Aaron, I think this is like one of the things that I observed. Maybe Aaron, you can comment on this. It's in outside the valley, because I also face this question. You have to get really practical at asking somebody to do something that's going to be very similar to what they're going to do on the job, right? I don't know what the hiring or screening practices are in the valley, but the most effective, say, recruiting techniques or screening techniques for us was the practical, like giving them a practical exam, precisely, Arvs, what you had said. I mean, I think Aaron right now is using that exact same tactic, because you can check the quality of their code. You can check to see how you could check to see how they react, how they problem solve, whether or not they're pixel perfect or not, which it'll be evident in their craft work. But Aaron, maybe share your thoughts about like kind of how to be able to spot whether or not somebody is a right fit for your team.
So it depends, right? If you're hiring like a fresh grad, or somebody just fresh off university, what I look for the most is initiative, and the willingness to learn, right? When I ask them what I look for when I look at their code, isn't necessarily how accurate, how pixel perfect their work is. I look for how they tried, because I kind of intentionally make the problem a bit vague, because I kind of want to see how they interpret vague questions, right? Or vague problems, and how they try to problem solve that. And what I really look for is initiative, I would say. How you would try to do maybe beyond what is just being asked from you, right? But it depends. If we're gonna go to like what Louis is asking, like how would you find an engineering leader, right? I think it depends a lot on what your current company's culture is, and I would look for someone who can fit that culture and bring it to the next level, right? Something as specific as that. So it's going to be very, very hard if there's already an existing set of people or engineers there who are doing their own thing, and you're going to look for somebody to lead them in the best way possible, right? It's not that you can't just find somebody else, somebody good enough to do that, right? But I'm talking about like who would be the best person, right? I would say that culture is number one. Not discounting, technical equity, right? Just being able to do the job at the minimum. Because at the end of the day, if you're this CTO or your engineering leader and you're not able to do some of the things that your engineers are gonna do, then it's gonna be hard to be that leader. It's gonna be hard for them to relate to you, right? Because they don't know if you've been in the industry for like decades or something, right? And your engineer can't relate to you, it's going to be hard for them to properly respect you, right? And look up to you and see themselves in you, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. A lot of the times it's really, at least for me, when I think about leadership, it's me like, being in the trenches with the engineers and problem solving with them, right? Not being the boss, but being there with them and struggling with them, right? Trying to solve the same problems as them, right? Being, making sure that they feel like that we're all part of the same team, trying to solve the same problems. Right. I think that's what I would go for.
Oh, that's really interesting. And because we lose sight of that, and I just realized that in some ways, I'll just speak to like Swarm now in our internal culture. Everyone is hands-on. Like if somebody else has the goal for today was to get X number of people to sign up for this workshop. Every single one, me, Alexis, Aaron, went out and made sure that the person who was responsible for this was successful. And we went out and did direct outreach. I mean, that's a very non-technical example, but I think that especially in the early stages, being able to build a company where you do feel like you trust the person to your left and the right, it takes that, right? And there's that genuine accountability for, is the person to my left and right going to be successful? And it feels quite empowering, right? It feels quite empowering. I think that, as it relates to recruiting, well, who do you want to be the person to the right of your right and the left of your left? Hopefully, it is worth the time to spend a moment to talk about what your values are, and not in like words on the wall sense, not your buzzwords, but like what we did in Swarm. Manny's the one who helped us do this. Is we identified people, if we got them, like realistic or not, that would help us reach our goals, reach our vision. And we asked ourselves, well, what would they contribute? So it wasn't an abstract exercise of defining values. It was like, it started with the practical, the who. Like, who do we know? What would they contribute? Whether it's a specific skill or a specific kind of mindset, their ability to motivate, and then we turn that into our values. And I think that when you're that small, you could kill your organization if you don't find the people who can slot into that, and to Aaron's point, to contribute to that. And what kind of leads into like why one of the reasons that I really respect all three of you is you all are not just building the culture of your own organizations and companies, you all are going out and building community, right? Arvs, you have a fan club. I mean, we talked to a few folks and you're like kind of Mr. Circuit Speaker, and I think everyone sees you as somebody who's really trying to build the ecosystem and the standards of where we live, and setting the pace, setting the tone, and also the aspiration, not just for the people that work with you, but the people who are trying to break into tech or to become a developer and an engineer. And Ian, my goodness, I mean, you're at what, your fourth or fifth company where you're the head of engineering, and like one of the things that I really appreciate, I reread your manifesto for being an angel investor. And it wasn't about picking the winners and losers. It was about people is wanting to get behind the people who are going to make a difference, right? And I thought that was remarkable. And I thought that was, the last thing that you said is, yeah, I want to make a return, but only when I help people solve practical problems, when I help get in the trenches and help them solve the technology issues that they're facing and to build their organizations. And then that's what translates into money, right? I think that, there's something here where now we're having this conversation across, two continents. The folks who are on the call are all over the world, but by enabling each other to make each other successful, it isn't just about now helping people within our companies, in our contexts, when our KPIs are on the line. But what we're seeing now is this explosion of entrepreneurship and tech founders in other parts of the world, and I see you both as being scions of that movement. I also want to shout out like one of our angel investors on the call, Bernard Liang, who's dropping kind of notes here and there. He's gone through this journey too. Well, we'll actually probably get you, Bernard, in one of these future talks if you're open to it. He's early days, early engineering at DoorDash. And I think this is kind of what it's going to take to get us to to the next level. But maybe like Arvs, tell us, like, what inspired you to, to kind of go out there and kind of be almost like an evangelist, and also like what inspired you to write your book?
All right, thank you for that. To give some context on why I'm doing this is, for me, for some reason, being part of events and communities helps me reset. Reset meaning I'm able to get rest because of that. It sounds cheesy, but here's how it works. I'm a workaholic, or maybe not, but basically when I work, so Aaron's laughing because I work at least 12 to 16 hours per day, and even during weekends. Every day is a work day. Since day one. I'm not sure where I got it. Maybe it's genetics or something. But sometimes when you are working for, let's say, 3 months, 16 hours per day, 6 times a week, and then maybe a bit of Sunday, you need to stop yourself from working and find ways to chill a bit and be someone who's able to also work with people also outside of your company. So at first, I decided to join events, join conferences, and then luckily, it became regular that I was able to speak in conferences. What I did there to share with you is I was probably lucky that when I was in college, we had this English class where the English teacher gave super low grades to everyone. And the highest grade was 1.25. And that was for the best performers of that class. That includes writing, public speaking, and usually technical leaders, or at least the technical leads and the senior developers, usually take time to become good public speakers. And it probably took me 3 to 5 years to learn that. Those 3 to 5 years came from where I'm still in school at that point. And even until now, I'm still developing. What I would like to share is that being able to share your knowledge and contribute back to the community is one of the things that I learned, because at the start, it was because of me wanting to rest and be part of the community and stop working. After 3 years, because I started becoming an AWS user group Philippines leader, I was able to work with the purists, the ones who are really passionate about sharing in the community. So Rafi, Diwa, Mike, and more. And what I learned from them is that they literally just help the community without asking for anything in return. And that's what I learned from them. And what the skills that I learned there were a lot, in the sense that when you're teaching someone, I realized that you'll actually learn more about certain topics, and you learn more about how do you work with people outside of your company, because sometimes you learn things indirectly. So let's say that let's say somebody asks you, how do you set up this VPC, something like that, and then the thing that they're solving is super different from what you're solving. And that's where you get a different take on how to solve these problems. And then at some point, after 7 years, 8 years, somebody reached out, someone from the PAC team. They initially wanted me to create a book on certification, because at that time, I was one of the, even until now, I'm one of the people helping update the AWS certification exams. So 90% from AWS, and then some lucky ones being able to contribute in updating the certification exams. However, I'm not allowed to do that because there's conflict of interest. I mean, imagine you contributing to the exams and then you're going to write a book on certification, right? So I rejected the first offer on me writing a book on certification because it doesn't make sense. I'm one of the people helping update the global certification exams, and I'm going to write a book about it. So I rejected that. 4 months later, another person from PAC reached out and asked me, what topic do I want to write? Something on machine learning. And I wrote and we had different options. I told that person, maybe we can do multiple services. And that person told me, maybe you can focus on one, maybe SageMaker. And then what I did is I did some research, and then I took it on. A lot of people told me that you'll not earn any money writing a book. And then I told myself, yeah, that's fine. Because one of the trickiest things that I had to encounter when you're in a management position is that whether we like it or not, when you're doing something else, let's say 70% of your time is really on management, you will lose some of the skills because let's say that if you are a senior developer, 90% of your time most likely would be on coding. And you will be able to be super sharp and super deep in what you're trying to do. However, when you're a technical manager, let's say CTO, and the higher you are in the org chart, the harder it is for you to go deep into the problem of a single developer. And I took I took the chance of writing a book because it forces me to become super technical again. In the sense that I had to scan through the entire internet, and I was able to at least get it back right now. So I'm pretty confident right now that I'm technical again, because in my last 5 years, I knew that my technical abilities were declining, especially the hands-on part. So after writing the book, yeah,
I see. So it's like being a part of the community is rest for you, and writing a book is staying sharp, staying technical. That's interesting. Ian, like I'm sure you're super busy building like, like the next rocket ship, literally for Rose Rocket. Um, it takes a lot of work, especially if you want to get hands-on with founders. What inspired you to want to get in and be an angel that's hands-on?
Yeah, there's a lot of thoughts that come into play, and actually I'll answer that question, Dexter, but there's one other piece that I want to add, which is a bit tangential, but like for me, the participating in community of founders, community of other developers, community of Filipinos, of Southeast Asians is really important. Well, one, because it gives me energy, because as I mentioned earlier, I think whatever you do, do something that gives you energy. For me, I actually enjoy sort of selflessly helping other people because it's really transforming their lives. Like I'll give you some quick examples. So at Airbnb, I didn't share this earlier, but I actually had this track record internally at Airbnb for helping non-developers in the company. So literally there was someone in finance, there was one of our cooks literally in the kitchen that I had proactively reached out to and heard that they were interested in development. But fast forward today, they are developers. Because I like there are literally countless examples where I specifically have helped these people grow. Now they're in the engineering career, and that's awesome. But the common thread of just not expecting anything in return, but helping others, knowing that it transforms both their lives and affects the future, is something that gives me a lot of energy. And then the tangential thing I'll add to me, like I like everything that you said, Dexter. Actually, almost I'm not one that cries, but it also almost made me a tear, which is like I think a lot about my earlier years when I was younger, and what would have helped me at that time to do even more and be inspired by others. And yes, I was at companies in Silicon Valley. Like I'm Filipino. Both my parents are. At that time, there were no Southeast Asians or Filipinos in these companies, and the topic of diversity is now a more common topic but back then was not. And I only bring this up because what I think about in getting involved in the community is I want to be able to inspire other people, not just Filipinos, also Southeast Asians, also other cultures. But I want to be, or at least have somewhat of an influence on being an inspiration for someone out there that is either trying to, do their first engineering role, or maybe they're well experienced in their career and they're looking to make a jump to leadership or whatever that is. Because I know these things affect and influence people's lives, and especially plugging in with the Filipino community. I mean, it's so exciting to me because it's only more recently that I'm really reflecting about these on myself. because back in the day, and like what Arv said, it's like being a bit of a workaholic. I think ours, like in this chat alone, I'm learning a lot more about you, and I think there's similarities in each other, because I have somewhat of that behavior as well of being a workaholic, but now I'm being much more reflective about my experiences and wanting to think about the future. Like I have two kids now. They're very young, 3 and 5 years old. But I think a lot about them and others, and like, what can other people do with their experiences to influence the future of others. So all of this to me is really about being somewhat of a light of inspiration, influential. Going back to your question, Dexter, on angel investing, I mean, I enjoy it because to me, it's a scalable way of thinking about different problems. Like literally just yesterday, I was talking to one of the companies that I'm official advisor for, which is Coin Tracker. They're one of the world's top tax crypto portfolio companies. I work closely with their founders, and I love thinking about either the technical challenges. I mean, hiring, like even hiring the inside story, and this is a bit of a pitch for myself to founders out there. Like if we're working together and we invest, like I help connect the people in my network to join and be either engineers or head of engineers or sales leads in other companies. And again, I'm no recruiter, right? I'm not looking for like a placement fee or anything. I'm literally just connecting the best people I know with the other best people I know, and trying to pay it forward in that sense. So all of this gives me a ton of energy, and I'm just going to continue doing it. And especially with the Filipino community, even more so, because what I get excited by is maybe 5-10 years from now, both companies in the Philippines, anywhere in the world, in the Valley, there's just more people like us, males, females, I mean, just across the board. And that's what I want to participate in, to somewhat have any influence growing in the world.
It's phenomenal. I'm both humbled and grateful that you all joined, even you, Aaron. I think that for us, our businesses, our roles at work, and what impact we want to make, it's now, we're in a position now where those are no longer separate. I think that building an ecosystem within our companies, across companies, within our ethnic communities, our global communities, now is the time in which we can make this happen, right? We're supporting each other, we're challenging each other, we're learning from each other. And it's one of the things that, after I left Caliber, my last company, it's why I wanted to get my toe in now, not take that break. It's because, this is the world's changing now, and it's possible to interconnect and to support each other and help each other. So I think I'm grateful that Swarm kind of merges that personal desire to want to be able to build community, and also kind of build a company that can try to, that can scale, right? And I think it's because I have people like you, Arvs, Aaron, and Ian to my left and to my right, that I feel like I can pull it off. So on that note, thank you to everyone who joined. Thank you to all the folks in the On Deck community, Excalibur, Python PH, all the folks who joined us from other parts of the world. Thank you. We hope to do this regularly, and I learned a lot. And thank you.